Hey, Pastor Josh here. We're reading Acts chapter 7, verses 17 through 22. And God prepares you for what you need. God knows what you need before you know what you need. He has a great, wonderful policy to prepare you for what you need, even before you even realize it. And we're going to see this with Moses. If you remember, we are in the middle of Stephen's sermon, the sermon in which he will die at the very end. And he is giving a biblical, theological sermon. He has given us an overview of the Old Testament, trying to defend the fact that he does not reject God, he does not reject the temple, and he does not reject God's law. And so we have seen, he mentioned Joseph, who was rejected by his brothers, and now he's going to talk about Moses, who will be rejected by the Israelites. And if you can guess where this might be running to, who is rejected by the high priest and religious leaders, the very people that Stephen is talking to? Okay, I'm not going to give it away. You can read ahead in your Bibles if you want to know how exactly it runs. But we're going to go through Stephen's sermon verse by verse through the rest of this month. So we have now come to the part where the Israelites, the patriarchs, the 12 tribes of Israel, the fathers have all come and they're repopulating in Egypt. So let's pick up at that point. But as the time of the promise drew near, which God had granted to Abraham, the people increased and multiplied in Egypt until there arose over Egypt another king who did not know Joseph. So the Israelites are getting bigger and bigger, the Israelites are getting bigger and bigger in Egypt. And then Pharaoh is actually going to feel threatened because there's so many of them. This is what he does in verse 19. He doesn't remember about Joseph and how he had a dream, how his previous Pharaoh had a dream and he interpreted it, and Joseph saved him. He didn't know this. And so he dealt shrewdly with our race, with the Israelites, and forced our fathers to expose their infants so that they would not be kept alive, to throw them in the Nile River. And at this time Moses was born, and he was beautiful in God's sight. And he was brought up for 3 months in his father's house. And when he was exposed, that is, put in the Nile River, if you remember, it's very interesting how Moses' mommy took care of this problem. She was commanded to throw the baby in the water, and that's what he did. She put him in the water, except she put him in a basket to protect Moses. And you probably know the story. Moses' basket ends up going to the princess's place where she would come and bathe, and she sees Pharaoh, or she sees Moses, and she adopts him as her own. And so here's Moses in the water in his little basket. Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. So here's the fact that God gives us what we need. He provides for us before we ever know what we need. God is providing for the Israelites. God is providing for Moses. And God is giving Moses the experience and the skills that he's going to need to be a leader, what he's going to need in order to lead the Israelites in the wilderness, and ultimately even be in charge of creating the law code and in charge of writing it down and receiving it from the Lord. If you remember, this is the big accusation that Stephen is facing as he is preaching. He is being accused of rejecting the law of Moses. And so Stephen is really going to focus really hard on Moses right here, because Moses is the one that God told to build the tabernacle, which would later become the temple. Remember, tabernacle is a word for tent. So it was a temporary tent, then it became a building later on. And then Moses was the one that God gave the laws to, the Ten Commandments and all the others. The first 5 books we call the books of Moses, because he wrote them down and initially wrote 98% of it, perhaps the end, and a few glosses and a few adjustments that later folks, scribes, would have put in to kind of clarify some things for folks. But Stephen is focusing on Moses. And then what does it say in verse 22? And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds. God gave Moses what he needed before he ever knew he needed it. He needed the wisdom of the Egyptians. He needed to know how to write. He would have learned hieroglyphics, right? And then perhaps would have been the one to actually put the Hebrew alphabet and the words to paper and pen and It wouldn't be pen, but you know what I mean, to actually write it down and to learn how to do that, and the ways to administer in such. So God was providing for Moses, providing for the Israelites before they ever knew they needed anything, just like God provided for Joseph's brothers before they ever knew they needed anything. God did it for them. God's going to continue to do it for you if you are his child, if you trust in him. But remember, God is preparing you for whatever future tasks he has for you to do. He's a God of provision. He is Jehovah Jireh. Look that up. Jehovah Jireh. Pray that's been a blessing to you, and I'll see you in the next video.